Support for Conversations Live, Get Your Garden On comes from the Environmental Programming Endowment, the Gertrude J. Sant Endowment, and the James H. Olay Family Endowment. And from viewers like you. Thank you.
And welcome to WPSU's Conversations Live, Get Your Garden On. I'm Ann Danahy. Gardening's popularity continues to boom. At a time when we're looking for something enjoyable to do that's close to home, gardening is a great choice. Whether you're ready to grow vegetables, looking for tips on pruning trees, or trying to decide which flowers to plant, we have two experts here to answer your questions. Tom Ford is a Penn State Extension horticulture educator. He works with commercial horticulture operations and growers in Cambria County. His areas of expertise include greenhouse and nursery production and fruit trees. Tom Butzler is also a Penn State Extension horticulture educator. He works with commercial horticulture operations and landscapers in Clinton County. His areas of expertise include vegetable production and beekeeping. You too can join tonight's conversation. Our toll-free number is 1-800-543-8242. Our email address is connect@wpsu.org. Tom Butzler and Tom Ford, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know a lot of gardeners, myself included, are really ready to get out there this year more than ever. Tom Butzler, can you start us off by talking about what we can be doing right now? What can we be planting in the garden, or at least getting ready to plant while we still have some of that cool, rainy weather?
Right. So, this weekend it is going to start warming up. We've got some bright, sunny days ahead. The air temperatures are going to start warming. And therefore, the soil temperatures are going to start warming. And we can safely go in for some early season crops, such as peas and lettuce. And in another week, with these warmer temperatures, days continuing, we go with carrots and beets. So we can get into the garden this weekend.
Of that, Tom Ford, on the tree side of that is now also a time when you can start looking at your trees, maybe taking a look at pruning your trees or even replanting or moving them around.
Yeah, you definitely want to. You should really be thinking about looking at your landscape and thinking about planting new shrubs and trees for the spring. But there's some things that may temper your enthusiasm a little bit, especially with young trees, because we will be seeing the cicadas later on. We'll talk about that probably a little bit later on tonight. But cicada injury could be a reality for young trees. What we should be thinking on is if you have fruit crops, if you have apples, if you have peaches, this is the great time to get the apple trees pruned in a few weeks. Okay, as we get a little bit more advanced into the season, probably prior to bloom or right after bloom, you could consider to prune something like your peach trees. So right now is the ample time to come back in and at least start thinking about pruning your fruit crops. When we get to ornamentals, it becomes more problematic. We typically do not like to prune oak trees in the spring because of the risk of the spread of oak wilt. We also typically do not do a lot of spring pruning on ornamentals because a lot of the ornamentals will bleed. If you end up pruning a maple tree, even though bleeding, the sap running out of that maple doesn't really hurt that tree too much, that sap running, unfortunately, it may drip for weeks, and it can be very disconcerting to many gardeners.
So you want to be careful about what you're pruning and not just get going with everything in the garden. Take a careful look at it. When it comes to planting seeds, I was looking at some of the seed packets I had the other day, and it seems like, okay, I can plant them now, maybe moving into April a little bit. But Tom Butzler, it also says the warning about frost danger. So how do you know when it's okay to get the carrots in, or do I need to worry about the possibility of a frost?
Yeah, so you mentioned seed packets, and those are a great source of information because they give you some guidelines on, when it's safe to go in into the garden and plant some of these things and when you should hold back. So, right now we talked about peas and carrots and, broccoli and cauliflower coming up soon, our cool season crops. But we do have to be careful with our warm season crops, such as our tomatoes, eggplants, cucumbers. And so we need to be aware of what we call this frost-free date. And it's going to vary, where you live. The further south, maybe into the valleys, we're looking at, in late April, early May. In central Pennsylvania, I like to think the ballpark of our last frost date, middle May. But as you get into the higher elevations and up onto that New York border, you may be looking at late May, even higher elevations, maybe, that 1st of June. So those are important things to be aware of. People last year were over eager, just excited to get out in the garden, just like they are this year. And they went in with their tomatoes and their peppers a little too early because of overexcitement. And we got a cold spell that came in and it hammered those tomato plants. Now, the garden centers may have liked that because people then had to go buy some more plants. Those warm season crops can't handle those type of conditions. So be aware of the weather, how it's playing out. But also, as we started talking about earlier, this conversation, look at those seed packets.
Okay, so even if it seems like it's warming up as we move into May and it seems like, okay, summer's here, you have to kind of control yourself and be careful and wait until it's really safe to get them in.
Yes, and there are ways to cheat the system. You can gain a week or two by playing around with the microclimate around those plants. As you can see in this picture here, these are covers that you can put over the plant that retain the heat, just a couple degrees, and that is enough for some of these warm season plants to make it through a little bit of a cold snap. So there are ways to kind of play with the environment a little bit. There's plenty of fact sheets and literature out there to see the correct way to do it. But yes.
To be careful. Okay, well, it looks like we have a caller, and this is from Marlene in Morrisdale. Hi, Marlene. Thanks for calling. And what can we help you with?
Well, thank you for taking my call. And my question concerns mushroom manure. How much, I have box gardens, and how much should you put on your garden? Could you sprinkle on your garden? Someone told me you can use too much and it can burn your plants. Or should you put it in the hole with the plant? Which should you do? Or should you sprinkle it on and then dig it in?
Great question. Okay, who wants to field that question? What's the best approach to using manure in the garden?
Go ahead, Tom. You're good on the fertility.
Yeah, with mushroom substrate, it can contain a high soluble salts level. And so if you're going to use it, it's a great nutrient source, but you have to use some discretion. You have to use relatively small amounts of the product. I would never mix it in the planting hole because you can actually cause water to move from the root system to dilute the salt in the media or in the soil. So what I would typically do is broadcast about 1/4 of an inch right across the soil surface of your box gardens, and then sort of scratch it in and mix it into the soil, but probably no more than 1/4 of an inch. Okay, it has plenty of nutrients in it, and the second thing you're looking at is you want to mitigate that salt issue. And there are some loads that that come in that will have really relatively low salt levels. Some will be higher salt levels. So it's hard to paint this with a very broad brush. But I always rather say err on the side of caution. Use it very judiciously.
We hope that answers your question. And I have a follow-up question to that. Is there a particular type of mulch or manure that's better to use? So she was talking about using mushroom. Is there a particular kind, or does it vary by plant?
When you're thinking about, we're going to look at two different things. Animal manures are used typically as a nutrient source. And we can, poultry manure has got its properties. Horse manure has its properties. Our biggest thing is we really want to usually try to incorporate a manure that has been composted rather than manure that has been stockpiled or manure that is fresh. And it's not just the nutrient issues. Sometimes we're also worried about food safety because, unfortunately, animal agriculture, livestock, can shed E. coli, can shed salmonella, and we don't want a food safety issue even in a home garden. So what we try to do is to apply manure in the fall of the year to the cover crop that's growing, and probably do not apply any manure in the spring of the year. When we think about mulch, though, mulch is typically just an organic matter source. There's no animal manure in it or anything else. So a lot depends on what our sort of plan of attack and what we're doing. In a vegetable garden, we may use straw. I would not use hay because that's more weed seeds. In a landscape setting, we're typically going to be dealing with hardwood bark or pine bark. Hardwood bark is cheap, it's readily available from our hardwood industry. It too should be composted, but it will have over time a pH around 7.2, which may not be the best when you're dealing with acid-loving plants. Personally, I like pine bark. Pine bark has higher lignin content. It's more stable typically in the environment, and the pH usually isn't as high, usually around 6.5, even if it's composted.
Okay, great information. And it looks like we have another call, and this is from Millie in Indiana. Hi, Millie. Thanks for calling, and what can we help you with?
I have a problem with flowers that have petals, like the coneflower, daisies, anything that has petals, and something eats off all the petals. It has happened now for the last 3 years, but before that I never had any problem. What could I do? Anything I could spray it, or what is your
Yeah, sounds frustrating. That's a great question. What can she do to try to ward off either the animals or insects that are eating her flowers?
I guess so. One question for Millie. I mean, are the leaves completely gone, or can you see
They're
portions of the
completely
leaf
gone.
missing?
But the centers will be fine.
The
And
centers
the
of the
leaves
leaf?
are fine. It's just the petals disappears.
The whole petal disappears.
So it's eating all the petals and leaving the center.
Yeah, one of the things that can do that is actually we'll see spotted cucumber beetle, especially of the daisy flowers, coneflower, the echinacea, some of the daisies as well. A lot of times they'll just do a little bit of notching, but they'll also go ahead and consume the petal, leaving the center as well. The problem is the insecticides that you use to control some of these insects, unfortunately, will impact pollinators. So that's kind of, again, Tom Butzler is kind of an expert with pollinators, but a lot of the insecticides we would use could be problematic. And when you're dealing with an adult beetle like that, that could be, again, an issue because they're not going to be as sensitive to chemistries. The material that we would maybe look at on a home garden standpoint, maybe like a natural pyrethrin, because it breaks down in sunlight very quickly. It will give you pretty quick knockdown. But the insecticidal soaps are not going to give you very much control as far as any type of adult beetles. And then the other products that we'd use, unfortunately, would be very pollinator toxic.
So that sounds like a tricky question. Is there any approach? Should she just try to plant some different types of flowers, or do you have to just kind of?
The one she was talking about, the example she gave are perennials, so she would have to remove those. I mean, she could go to some annuals. I guess I think you really need to find out what is going on. So this may mean to monitor or scout your landscape. Whether you're in a commercial setting or a homeowner setting, the idea is that you're getting out into that landscape on a regular basis to see what is going on. So, it could be an insect problem. I don't know. Maybe the deer are coming in and feeding, or maybe something else is going on. But before you start applying any type of pesticide, you really need to figure out exactly what you're dealing with. So, yeah, yeah.
That's great advice. So try to figure out if you can monitor it all, take a look and see what's doing the damage, and then take it from there.
Maybe go out once in the morning, maybe once in the afternoon, maybe in the evening when the sun's dying, the heat hasn't built up. So, go out kind of on a regular basis and monitor the situation.
Well, we hope that helps. And it looks like we have another call, and this is from Jane in Johnstown. Hi, Jane. Thank you for calling. And do you have a question for us?
Yes. We have a dwarf Macintosh apple tree, and its trunk was scraped by deer this past fall. My husband read online that the scraped area should be washed with dish detergent. Is that correct, or is there something else we should do, or nothing at all?
Another great question. I know I have that issue sometimes. The deer comes along and it scrapes it. What's a good approach for handling that?
Well, definitely don't scrub it with dish detergent, okay? The dish detergent is not going to do anything. A lot of times they have the surfactants. They may actually help penetrate into the tissues a little bit, but that's some advice to ignore. Better off just letting sort of nature take care of itself. Plants usually will try to produce what they call a suberlin layer after it's wounded, and that suberlin layer will protect it. You don't want to do anything to interfere with that suberlin layer that forms. The only thing I may consider doing is if I have some real loose, tattered bark, I may take a sharp knife and trim off any loose bark. But that's the extent. I'm going to let the plant heal itself. None of the asphalt-based tree coats, tree paints, or anything like that will do anything to protect that tree. But definitely don't use any dish soap.
Well, I hope that helps. As a follow-up to that, is it a good idea to have a protector around the tree if you're worried about a particular tree? Is that something you can do to try to prevent the deer?
You can. We kind of are a little hesitant with some of the plastic tree guards that we see sold in some of the garden centers because they trap moisture up against the bark, and they can actually encourage dogwood borer on apple and peach tree borer in peach, cherry, plum, nectarine. So we don't like to see the plastic guards. If you were going to do something, I would get very fine, like hardware cloth or some steel mesh, come out 3 or 4 inches from the trunk and create a cylinder to protect the bark. The other thing that you can do is there are repellents. A lot of the commercial orchard folks will use human hair placed in like mesh bags, even nylon stockings, and hang them in the orchard, or take deodorant soap, drill a hole in the deodorant soap, and it looks like you're decorating for Christmas, but you're going to put 1 or 2 bars of deodorant soap in every tree. And the odor both the deodorant soap gives off as well as what the human hair gives off usually keeps the deer away.
Okay, well, great advice, and we hope that helps. And for those of you who are just joining us, I'm Ann Danahy, and this is WPSU's Conversations Live, Get Your Garden On. We're talking with Tom Ford and Tom Butzler, and we're taking your calls and questions. If you have a call, our toll-free number is 1-800-543-8242, and we're ready to take those calls or emails at wpsuconnect@wpsu.org. So one of the big issues that we are seeing across Pennsylvania is the spotted lanternfly. Tom Butzler, can you tell us a little bit about this, what to look for and what type of damage it's doing?
Yeah, spotted lanternfly. Newsflash, it's on the move, right? So, this was found several years ago now, in southeastern Pennsylvania, and there was a concerted effort to really limit its movement and spread. And, it's tough to contain these invasive insects and plants and so forth. And it has since spread throughout Pennsylvania. I think we're at about now 39 counties, all the way over to the western border with Ohio and up to the New York border. And in fact, it's you can see in the picture there, the counties that are highlighted in purple represent the infestations up to a couple months ago. These areas are quarantined. And 9 other counties, the ones representing blue, were added to this quarantine. So you can see how extensive it's spread since its initial find in Berks County. So not only is it spread throughout Pennsylvania, it's in about 9 different states: Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, Connecticut, and so forth. And so, there is a lot of effort to try to prevent this from moving. So you can see the slide there that's been put up on the screen showing some of the life stages and some of the things you need to be aware of where this female will lay her eggs. And so really there's a big effort to try to educate the public because we humans are very, very efficient at moving these insects around. They're not the greatest flyers. They will move on their own. But for the spread that they have had throughout Pennsylvania and the surrounding states, we have done a very good job of moving them around.
If you do see it, if you're in one of the counties that doesn't yet have them, what should you do? Should you call extension or should you just try to kill it? What steps should you take?
All the above. So there are some hotlines. You can call your extension educator in your county or the extension office. They'll direct you to where you need to report that. PDA has a site Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture has a site where you can report that. And also, you do want to kill it if you can, scrape off the egg mass, kill the adult. You might want to save that specimen in case they need some evidence or want to further investigate.
Okay, great advice. And we do have another call, and this is from Simon in Halfmoon Township. Hi, Simon. Thanks for calling, and what can we help you with?
Yes, thanks for taking my call. I was wondering, is it too late to spray grubs for Japanese beetles? And if so, other than using a product such as Grub X, is there a manner in doing so that would not make your garden inhospitable to other insects? And I will hang up and listen to the answer.
Thanks for the question. So getting rid of some of those pests, but not being inhospitable to good insects.
Yeah, when you're thinking about white grubs, we're out of the window to really treat white grubs right now. They're still probably deep in the soil profile. They'll move up as the weather gets warmer. They're going to go ahead and pupate, and then we're going to see them start to emerge, typically in that June period with peak flight, sort of the end of June, 1st of July or so. So usually the treatment for white grubs usually is during that peak flight period. And so that's usually that late June, early July period. And we usually use, when we think about chemical pesticides, we typically use like a imidacloprid, which is a neonicotinoid insecticide. That's usually the material of choice for most individuals. There is also another chemistry out there called Acceloprin that is used on the market in the marketplace as well. The problem is you can't use Acceloprin in a vegetable garden, and the imidacloprid material is not something used in a vegetable garden or around edible crops in that respect either, as far as materials are labeled for grubs. But there are some things you can do. We look to our neighbors to the north. We go across the line into Canada. The only grub treatment that they actually allow are actually beneficial nematodes. So if you wanted to garden on the softer side and you wanted something to apply for white grubs, typically right around the first week of August, you could bring in specific beneficial nematodes and apply them as a drench to the soil where you have that white grub problem. If you do that with beneficial nematodes, you can usually achieve similar levels of success that you would see typically with some of the chemical pesticides. There is also a BT formulation in a product, I believe it's called Grub Gone, that is relatively newer to the marketplace that has a label for white grubs that can be soil applied as well. But that would be the two, we'll say, the most environmentally friendly products to use if we want to garden soft, or I won't say organically, but at least bio-based, would be to use beneficial nematodes or the Grub Gone product, which is a BT formulation.
Okay, great.
Or I got a family of skunks. They're looking for a home. They'll clear them up real quick.
So skunks will take care of your grubs?
Oh, yeah, they'll take care of grubs. They might make your lawn look a little unsightly as they're digging up the grubs, but they'll take care of them.
Okay, well, that's good to remember that they have their plus side, too, if you have a family of skunks. Good to know. Looks like we have another call, and this is from Sue in State College. Hi, Sue. Thanks for calling. And what can we help you with?
Hi. This year, my asparagus patch will be 14 years old. And I've noticed in the last few years that the stalks are getting a little more crowded and spindly. I did get a soil test from Penn State to apply different fertilizers for this year, but I'm wondering if there's a life expectancy of asparagus.
Okay, great question. Asparagus, who wants to field that one?
Well, we'll let Tom, because Tom just gave a asparagus presentation to several hundred people the other day. So.
Yeah, asparagus does have somewhat of a limited life expectancy, but usually 15 years, 20 years is pretty much the max. But usually what I would do first, it's not something that I would want to, dig the asparagus patch up at this point in time. What I would probably do is follow the soil test. They have actually a great need for phosphorus. They're one of the crops that needs phosphorus. And even when we plant new crowns, we actually recommend broadcasting treble superphosphate in the furrow when we plant asparagus. So the phosphorus may need to be pushed a little bit more in that respect. They don't respond to nitrogen as well. So unlike a lot of other crops that have nitrogen needs, that's not something they need either, or not too much. So other thing I would do is let them go, do a very limited harvest this year, no more than, say, 1 week or 2 weeks, and then let them go to full fern. And let them go to full fern, and then see what you get next year. But limit your harvest this year, no more than 2 weeks, and then ideally from here on out, maybe only go to with about a 4 to 5 week harvest. Don't go beyond the 4 to 5 week harvest with it. Let them recover a little bit.
Okay, great. Well, we hope that helps, Sue. And we were just talking a little bit about asparagus earlier. It is a super popular plant this year, right? Aren't there actual shortages of it?
Most definitely. We were talking, as Tom alluded to, we had a webinar this week with asparagus growers and folks that want to put asparagus in this year. And crowns are hard to come by. So it's a situation. They have not seen this much popularity for asparagus crowns since the 1970s. And the other thing is that the traditional Jersey series of cultivars will be leaving the marketplace, which also is going to foster some shortages. So some of the Jersey Giant, Jersey Centennial cultivars, Jersey Supreme, a lot of them are going to go by the wayside. The patents are off. They're not going to not going to put them in the marketplace anymore. So when we subtract all those varieties off the marketplace, coupled with extreme demand, it spells major shortage.
Wow, that's good to know. So if you're thinking about growing asparagus, you might want to try to get them as soon as you can. It looks like we have another call, and this one is from Sharon in Stormstown. Hi, Sharon. Thanks for calling. And do you have a question?
Yes, and mine also relates to asparagus. I've had an asparagus patch. I've been harvesting it now for about 6 or 7 years. I let it have the first 3 years to just develop. But last year I noticed I had asparagus beetle for the first time, and they really took over the crop. I mean, I didn't really get nearly as much, and I'm wondering what I should do to prevent that happening this year.
Yeah, great question. Tom Ford?
A lot of times with asparagus, a little bit depends also on what your approach to gardening is going to be. As soon as you let an asparagus plant go into fern, it attracts the beetles, and they'll start actually laying eggs on the spears. So the first thing is that when you're in the harvest period, okay, don't let anything go to fern until you finished harvesting. Then let it go to fern. So we don't want to see where you're harvesting spears and letting some stuff go to fern, because that's going to create more problems for you. Once you go to fern, okay, the larvae will start, the eggs will start to hatch out, the larvae will start feeding on the fronds. So ideally, on the organic side, maybe a product like Pyganic. It's a natural pyrethrin labeled in vegetable gardens. It should give you control on contact if you hit the asparagus beetle larvae. Once they go to the adult stage, it's a little bit harder to control, and that's where it's become a little bit more of a challenge, because we're going to find a few lesser chemistries available. So my real recommendation would be is early season, while they're in frond, while they're in fern, and you got larvae present, probably consider a natural pyrethrin like Pyganic. And matter of fact, an insecticidal soap would also probably work on the soft larvae, because they're kind of more like a small grub-like insect that's feeding on the fronds. So usually an insecticidal soap should also work on contact.
Okay, that sounds like some great advice. And we have another call, and this is from Bill in Martinsburg. Hi, Bill. Thanks for calling. And do you have a question?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I have a Laburnum vossii tree, and I need to move it. Now, there are two issues. One is that, I'm putting a clothesline pole too close to it, so I need to move it. And the other is last year, I forget exactly what, but it needed to be pruned back a lot. So at present, it's maybe the main trunk is maybe 3 feet tall, and then a branch up maybe 5-6 feet. It is alive. It's showing buds now, but I'm wondering. I assume that now would be a good time to move it, but I don't know if there's any special things I need to do.
So this is the viburnum. What should you do?
How old is this? How long has it been planted?
Oh, it's 3 or 4 years old, I think.
Okay. So, moving, woody ornamentals can be done. The sooner, the better in its life cycle or age. If it's been well established, it's got a really extensive root system. I think, if possible, it'd be better to move it in the fall. That way, it has the winter kind of get acclimated, and then it also has the spring to acclimate. Moving it now, it has a shorter period of time to acclimate before we get into the deep growing season, warmer weather, and it could stress it out. But yeah, certainly you can move it now. If you do wait to the fall, maybe what you want to do is some root pruning now, where you would maybe dig on one side and on the opposite side, and prune those roots so you allow the interior of that root ball to really become dense with future roots. And then you dig in the fall on the opposite other two sides, plus the two that you dug now, and you've got a nice condensed root ball, and the woody ornamental would be better able to survive. But yeah, you can move it now. You're just going to have to pay special attention to it once we get into the warmer weather.
Would that mean making sure to water it if we have a dry spell, or what would be the best bet if he does need to move it now?
Yeah, absolutely. You're going to have to pay a lot of attention to it the whole growing season, not just the first couple weeks or months with water. If we had a summer this year like we had last year, that plant is going to hurt because you don't have that extensive root system to mine that surrounding water in that soil profile. So you're really going to have to pay attention to that water. Now, if it was like 2 or 3 summers ago where we got record-breaking rainfall, yeah, you're good to go. But yeah, you can move it now if possible. I think moving something that's established would be better with a fall move.
Okay, good to know. And we have another call, and this one is from Ted in Pine Grove Mills. Hi, Ted. Thank you for calling. And do you have a question for us?
Yes, I do. I have a question on my vegetable garden. About 4 or 5 years ago, I had a soil test done, and the nutrient levels were pretty good, as well as the pH. I have not tested it since. I'm wondering if there's whether one should annually, apply so many nutrients, like 10, 10, 10 or something, or lime to maintain without going to a soil test.
Yeah, that's a great question. How do you know what to put in every year? Do you need to get it tested every year, or what's the best approach?
I personally like to be prescriptive. I like to see a soil test done on a regular basis. We know that with many of our vegetable crops, how much phosphorus, how much potash they will utilize every year. We can predict, for the most part, based on yield, how much nitrogen they will use as well, too. So to me, a soil test is the best way prescriptively for us to be able to make those recommendations.
Okay, so if that's possible, do the soil test.
Yes, and you were just seeing a video there for those folks who could see the screen of how Penn State manages their soil test. It's a bag, you fill it up with soil, you fill out a form, and then you send it off. And I think, is it $9 or $12, Tom?
I believe it's $9.
$9. And that way, you get a reading on the pH. Tom talked about that earlier in the show on the pH range, and you like it around 6.5, 6.8, unless you're growing, as he mentioned, potatoes. And then it also gives you some indication on your phosphorus and potassium levels. So usually it's a pretty quick turnaround time with Penn State's lab. There are other outfits, entities that do that. So, you can go elsewhere too for that. But as Tom said, it gives you an idea of what to do for the upcoming growing season instead of walking into it kind of blindly.
Yeah, one of the dangers you run into is if you apply nutrients just because out of a habit, we'll see the phosphorus and potash levels get so excessive. And we also may see that calcium becomes too high and pH becomes too high. So instead of doing something good for the crops, you actually may limit yield because of having too high of nutrient levels.
That's great to know, because I know there's kind of a natural instinct, or at least I have it, that you just want to fertilize it, you want to put compost on it, you want to water it, but it sounds like you can overdo it in some cases.
Right. And Tom said limiting yield. So you can severely limit yield. And, for $9, I mean, you can make that up by having this really bountiful yield. So $9 is not much for greatly increasing the yield in your vegetable garden.
There's one statistic that always scares me, and they say that 80% of plant mortalities in the landscape is due to us, people. So when you think about that, we probably kill more plants with kindness than anything else.
That's a good way to think about it. Good to know. Well, if you're just joining us, I'm Ann Danahy, and this is WPSU's Conversations Live, Get Your Garden On. Joining us tonight are Penn State Extension horticulture educators Tom Butzler and Tom Ford. Our toll-free number is 1-800-543-8242, and we're ready to take your calls. You can also send us questions by email at connect@wpsu.org. And it looks like we have another call, and this one is from Carol in Clarion. Hi, Carol. What can we help you with?
I have moved to a house that has a garden with many old-fashioned phlox in it, which have been growing a number of years. The roots are untangled, and I'm just having trouble with mildew. I've tried buying a mildew spray, and I've tried making my own mildew spray, and nothing seems to work, and I'm almost, I don't know if there's any plants that you can buy that are resistant to mildew. I'm having a lot of trouble with mildew in my phlox.
In your phlox, is that right?
Yes, they're old-fashioned phlox.
Really pretty flowers. Anything she can do?
Yes.
There are some garden phlox cultivars that are supposed to be powdery mildew resistant. That are on the marketplace, but they're going to be the newer cultivars. The flower types will be the same, the habit will be the same. So that's something to think about. You may decide to go that route. I can't give you the cultivars off the top of my head. Sinclair Adam, who's a fellow horticulture educator, he's based in the Lebanon County office. Sinclair would probably be the most knowledgeable as far as which perennial cultivars which phlox cultivars may be the best ones to try. But one of the products that's available on the home and gardener side that's a relatively safe material is basically a product called, I believe it's either Calagreen or Armor Carb. It's a potassium bicarbonate product. And potassium bicarbonate is a material that can give us some control as far as powdery mildew. And that may be one thing that you can work with rather than make your own. I'm always leery of these remedies that you find on the internet or remedies that somebody recommends in an article someplace. You really want a product that is officially legally labeled as a pesticide for that product or for that pest or that disease. And there are potassium bicarbonate products out there that are labeled for control for powdery mildew on floriculture crops like phlox.
Yeah, two other quick comments on that is it sounds like it's a very established planting. So the other thing you might want to do is thin out some of those plants. You increase the air movement around there, and that might reduce the disease pressure a little bit, not eliminate it. But in addition, use some of those products that Tom talked about. So with that increased air movement and those products, and use those products early on. If you wait until this fungal disease gets a strong foothold, you're behind the curve, and it's really hard to control. So I talked about earlier about going on around your landscape, scouting, monitoring. If you get it on early enough, you may have a better chance of controlling that, plus the thinning.
Well, we hope that helps. And we have another call, and this one is from Wendy in Williamsport. Hi, Wendy. Thanks for calling. And do you have a question?
Yes.
Hi, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Hi, yes. I have a question about my hydrangea bushes. I have about 5 of them planted around my property, and they were beautiful and blooming when I planted them. And they're about 3 years old, and ever since I've not had a single bloom on any plant. They get beautiful and green, but I don't get any flower blooms.
Oh gosh, that must be really frustrating because those are really beautiful.
It is. I love them.
Any advice?
I wonder if those are hydrangea, macrofolia, big leaf hydrangea. And oftentimes they get hit in the spring with a cold spell, cold snap, and it ruins the flowering potential for that season. So I'm wondering if that's what you've got going on. I don't think there'd be a fertility problem or a nutrient problem. So I don't know, Tom. That's my first guess on it.
Yeah, when you think about big leaf hydrangea, usually most of them are what we call a zone 6 plant. They bear flowers on last year's wood. So anything that would create any injury to last year's wood, if you aggressively prune in the fall of the year, or you prune in the spring, or we have any type of severe winter weather or cold snap in the spring, anything that kills those flower buds ruins your floral display on macrophylla for the year. There is an exception to the rule. If you purchase what we call a remontant, that's remontant cultivar, like Endless Summer, the remontant cultivars bear bloom on macrophylla on both old wood and new wood. So if you're in the Williamsport area, select Endless Summer. That's the one I typically would recommend in your corridor. And no matter what weather you'll have, you will see blooms every year with Endless Summer. But there are other remontant cultivars out there beside Endless Summer, but Endless Summer is the easiest one for us to get a hold of. But like the old Nico Blue that's out there, that one, the buds get knocked back pretty much most years. So, but Endless Summer, Loretto, Cambria County, Zone 5, top of the mountain, there's some Endless Summer there in what they call the Assisi Gardens. No matter what happens, they bloom every year.
Well, that's great to know. Could she also take steps such as covering up the bushes if it is going to have a cold snap? Would that help?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a cold snap. It might be protecting them throughout the whole winter. Tom alluded to the winter issue. And so I've done this in the past at a previous house where I would surround it with something to hold in leaves. It was kind of a metal structure around the plant, and then I filled it up with leaves, and that was enough to buffer those cold temperatures. And then those flower buds survived winter, some of those early spring kind of moderating or widely fluctuating temperatures, and that worked out fine. So yes.
Okay, so a couple different options. Well, we hope that helps. And it looks like we have a call. This is from John in Winburn. Hi, John. Thanks for calling. And do you have a question?
Yes, we live on our yard is in a nearby to the woods, and we have a lot of moss in there. And I was just wondering if you get the pH test done, because we already applied a lot of lime, should we use herbicide and kill all that moss, or can we take care of it just by using lime?
Yeah, with moss, you're going to get that for a couple different reasons that you might have moss. One is that you've got that soil fertility kind of out of whack for a good grass growth and development. But the other thing is that you have excessive shade, or you've got an area of the yard, the lawn, that stays wet for long periods of time. And so I don't know if those could be possible situations too, or a combination of those three. So yes, do a soil test. You may need to add lime. You may need to limb up some of the surrounding trees, because you talked about near the forest situation. So if you limb up some of the leaves or limb up some of the trees or remove some of the trees, you're going to allow more sunlight to penetrate. And then, maybe do you have some groundwater or spring nearby that's keeping that soil excessively wet? So typically, those are the three reasons you're seeing moss there.
Well, we hope that helps. And on the topic of lawns, is now a good time to put seed in the lawn? Is it too cold, or is this a good time?
No, in all actuality, if you can go ahead and get your seed down, get it down now. The earlier the better as far as getting grass established. The other thing that'll be coming to fruition very shortly will be that if you are dealing with crabgrass, usually it's about the mid-April period, April 15th, April 20th, we'll be putting our crabgrass pre-emergence down. But the one thing to remember is if you're putting grass seed down, you cannot usually utilize a crabgrass material. Most crabgrass materials also will prevent desirable turfgrass seed from germinating.
Okay, good to know. And we have a call with a question about the spotted lanternfly. Hi, Barbara. Thanks for calling. And we understand you have a spotted lanternfly question?
Yes, thank you, Ann Danahy. So your guest mentioned that humans are really great spreaders of the spotted lanternfly. And could they explain how we can stop being big spreaders of the spotted lanternfly?
Great question.
Yeah, it is a good question. And really, it all comes down to education. Can you identify the different life cycles? The egg stage, the adult stage, the nymphal stages. There are a lot of people that don't know what this insect looks like. They're not paying attention, not really interested in the natural world around them. And so when they see something like this, don't give it a second thought. So usually in these quarantine areas for a lot of these these businesses that are moving in and out of these quarantine zones, they have to undergo training. Do they know what these various life stages look like? They're required to walk around their vehicle, inspect, under the wheel wells to see, if there's some hitchhikers there. That's really what it comes down to is that our population understands what this insect looks like. And that's really the key. If you know what it is, then, you can identify, movement of material in and out of these quarantine zones.
Okay, so if you're going out of county, if you're going somewhere where they might be present, just take the time to take a couple minutes and take a look at your car, make sure it didn't jump in your bags or hitchhike into your car, and make sure you remove it before you go back home.
Exactly. If you look at some of those fact sheets, and one of them you had up on the screen earlier, that female will lay her eggs on almost anything. Railroad ties, car tires, if the car has been stationary for a while, barbecue, what do you call where you do your grilling?
The equipment.
Yeah, equipment. And you go to a tailgate up at Penn State, something that's been sitting under a tree where the spotted lanternfly has been active for a while. She'll lay her eggs on almost anything. And then you go on vacation. People are moving this year because they just want to get out and about. And, that's really going to aid the spread if we're not careful.
Right. People are enjoying the national and state parks more, getting out and about, hiking, walking. So just take a couple minutes and make sure you're not bringing it back with you and carrying it with you. Very good to know. And we have a call from Bob in State College. Hi, Bob. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, well, thanks for putting me on here.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I've got a sort of a general question about opinion of State College Borough compost.
So we've got composting in State College Borough. Do you have anything in particular?
No, the compost that the borough sells.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if our guest knows specifically about that compost. Can you give us some general ideas about what makes for good compost?
Is he talking about the material that's coming out of the waste facility where they're taking some of the sewage and mixing it with sawdust or?
Are you talking about the borough? State College Borough has its own composting program.
Yeah, I'm not real familiar with particulars. I mean, are you asking about quality?
Oh yes.
Maybe we could talk generally. What makes for a good compost?
Yeah, anything.
Yeah, Tom Butzler, what should you look for when you are buying compost?
I mean, I guess, you kind of eyeball it because you can't really do a chemical analysis just standing there. But, it's got to feel good, light, kind of airy, fluffy. It's going to have a smell to it, kind of an earthy smell to it. And hopefully when this composting is going on, they've done it correctly. You want a correct carbon or a ballpark correct carbon nitrogen ratio, meaning, your browns, which would be leaves, for example, and your greens, which would be grass clippings or waste coming out of the kitchen, from vegetable dishes and so forth. And then, it's composted right where they've turned that pile on a regular basis. They've added moisture at the appropriate time so that these microorganisms can kind of thrive in this compost pile, start breaking things down. And then you got a product that can be suitable for the garden. Now, one thing, I don't know what's going on in the State College area, and I don't think this is so much of a problem anymore, but at one time there was an issue, and Tom was really heavily involved with this, an issue of using grass clippings that had been treated with some herbicides, worked its way into these compost facilities and programs, went through the whole composting process, and then were given or sold to folks for their gardens. and that herbicide was still there. It had not completely broken down. And we saw some damage to certain vegetable crops with exposure to this compost that still contained that herbicide. But I'm not sure exactly what's going on, over in Center County with that.
Okay, that's good to know. So you want to be careful what is going in the compost. Always good to keep that in mind. And it looks like we have another call, and this one is from Mary in State College. Hi, Mary. Thank you for calling. And what can we help you with?
Okay, thank you for taking my question. I'm calling because for years I've grown heavenly blue morning glories, and they've been beautiful. And maybe perhaps for the last 5 years, the vine grows and they're nice and healthy, but I don't get any blooms. Sometimes it's September or even October, just a few before the frost. And I've tried growing them from seed or from plants, that I've bought from a nursery. And I've also tried different places in the yard to see if that made a difference. But I only will get a few blooms way at the very last minute, so to speak.
Okay, that sounds frustrating. Anything that she might do differently?
If she is a heavy fertilizer, that will create issues for her because they'll stay in a vegetative state and they'll delay developing blooms. So the morning glories are like a weed. As long as you provide, excess nitrogen to them in a lawn situation, if there's any fertilizer in the lawn at all, if the soils have had a lot of compost applied to them, they will basically stay vegetative and you'll limit blooms. So back off the fertilizer. Don't put any fertilizer near the morning glory at all. Try to find a poor site even. If you have a site that has very poor soils, plant your morning glory.
Okay, so they want poor soil. We hope that helps, Mary. And we have another call. This one is from Mike in Spring Mills. Hi, Mike. Thanks for calling. And what can we help you with?
Hi, yeah, this is Mike. I'm a beekeeper first and a gardener second. And my question is on neonicotinoids, if I said that right. Yeah. And the effect of neonicotinoids on bees. I know you'd mentioned in putting it in your garden, so what are your thoughts?
Great question. And maybe before you talk about it, you could just, for the people who aren't familiar with that, explain what that is.
Okay, so it's a class of insecticides that people are using in vegetable production, agronomic production. And the insecticide is often systemic. We'll use it as a seed treatment. We'll use it as a drench. It's taken up through the vascular system of the plant, the plumbing system of the plant, and it's expressed in all plant parts so that when insects feed on it, they're exposed to this pesticide or this insecticide. And that's in contrast to using insecticides where you're spraying the whole plant or the whole field. So it's a different way to get that insecticide to interact with the insect. And so there is a lot of research going on with this, and there is concern of these insecticides, even though they're systemic in the plant, that your honeybees, not even just honeybees, pollinators, are interacting a little bit with this systemic insecticide through the pollen or the nectar. And so, at least in vegetable production, one of the things we're recommending is that if you are using a neonic insecticide, is that maybe use something that's a seed treatment, so that it goes into the plant, but by the time that plant is flowering, it is so well diluted or not there that it's not going to be a problem. We do want to avoid things like maybe the drenches where you're just putting in excess material. And then it's there around when that vegetable plant is flowering, and there might be some interaction between the pollinator and the systemic insecticide. So there's a lot of research going on with that. There are some neonics that are a little safer than others for pollinators, and there's some literature out on that. But it's of concern.
Okay, well, that's great information. And we have just a couple of minutes left. And I thought we could end today with you talking about what both of you are looking forward to doing this growing season. Tom Ford, why don't you start us off? We have just a little bit of time left. What are you looking forward to doing?
Well, actually, I have a 6-year-old grandson that spends a lot of time with us. So we're just exposing him to raised bed gardening. Last year, he took a great interest with tomatoes and peppers and squash, and got his little, we'll say, entomology course late summer when we were dealing with tomato hornworm, and he was fascinated by the little wasp eggs lining the tomato hornworm, and he was monitoring his tomato plant every day, looking at the worm as it would engulf a few tomatoes here and there. So I'm looking forward to continuing that with him this summer.
That's great. And Tom Butzler, how about you? What are you looking forward to doing?
Well, just like anybody else, get outside. And here's the thing about plants. They're all around us. So you've heard the adage before, take time to stop and smell the roses. Oftentimes the plants just blend in the black background. They're beautiful. They could be beautiful in flower, beautiful bark, or look at, as Tom alluded to, the battle going on between some of these insects and the predators that are trying to control them. So take time to smell the roses this year.
Tom Butzler and Tom Ford, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.
We've been talking with Extension educators Tom Butzler and Tom Ford. I'm Ann Danahy. Thank you for watching and listening, and please join us on our next episode of Conversations Live, Cooking at Home, on April 29th.